So the book of Zephaniah. Zephaniah was a prophet who served in Judah from around 640 to 621 BC. He lived in the days of Jeremiah, Nahum and Habakkuk, and also King Josiah, who you will remember is the boy who became king at the age of 8. You can read more about his story in 2 Kings 22 and 23 and 2 Chronicles 34 to 35. Zephaniah very likely influenced King Josiah to begin his reforms, and he helped to turn the nation back to God. This book was written to warn Judah of God's impending judgment, though, and to shake its people out of complacency. It foretells the fall of Judah and various other nations to Babylon, all of which happens exactly as Zephaniah had prophesied, and within just a couple of decades. So we have the destruction of Nineveh in 612 BC, Assyria in 609 BC, the first captives of Israel are taken to Babylon in 605 BC, and Judah finally falls in 586 BC. It's a really short book, it's only 3 chapters, and it's a declaration of God's judgment against Judah, the nations, and against the whole world. A judgment we also hear about through Joel, Amos, and Isaiah. And yet throughout this book of judgment, we have this hope for the remnant and ultimately for redemption and restoration. So a really quick overview then of the book. In chapter 1, we have Zephaniah introducing himself, and then we have this declaration that destruction is coming to everyone and everything. God says he will sweep everything away from the face of the earth. We then move on to a section where it talks about God's judgment against Judah and Jerusalem, and we hear why God's hand is against them. It's because they have become corrupt, they have become idolatrous, they've been worshipping Baal, they've been sacrificing children to Molech. Even the priests have allowed pagan practices to develop in the temples. The people have become complacent, they've become indifferent to God. We then hear about the great day of the Lord that is near, as also prophesied by Joel, Amos, Isaiah and Ezekiel, and we conclude chapter 1 with this statement that the whole world is going to be consumed. In chapter 2 then, Zephaniah implores the people to turn back to God quickly. In verse 3 he calls out to the humble, to those who do still obey God, to seek righteousness and humility in the hope that they will be sheltered from God's anger. We then see God's judgment against the nations, which again, it's an echo from Amos 1 and 2. Lots of this we hear through the other prophets as well. So it's against Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Cush, Assyria and Nineveh. And again, we've got echoes there from Jonah and from Nahum. Then chapter 3, God's judgment against Jerusalem specifically. In verse 1 and 2, God says, "Woe to the city of oppressors, rebellious and defiled. She obeys no one. She accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God." And then from verse 3, we hear that all the rulers, the officials, the prophets, the priests, all are corrupt and sinful. In verses 6 to 8, we have Jerusalem's refusal to repent. And in verse 7, God says, "Surely you will fear me and accept correction. Then her dwelling would not be cut off, nor all my punishments come upon her." But they were still eager to act corruptly in all they did. God gave them opportunity after opportunity, time and time again, the chance to come back to him. But repeatedly, this story of of the Israelites falling back into idolatry and their sinful ways. We've heard it all the way through from the times of Moses, and the pattern just didn't break. So their hearts have become hard towards God. They've become indifferent to their sin. And in chapter 1 verse 6 it talks about how they have turned away from following God. They no longer seek the Lord or inquire of him. And yet God doesn't turn back on his promises. 100 years earlier, he had promised that deliverance would come from the line of Judah. We see that in Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. And so we have this remnant through which the Messiah will come. From verse 9 to 13 of this final chapter, we see God's judgment doesn't just purge sin and evil from the world. It also purifies the remnant. It gives hope to the remnant of their redemption and their restoration, the hope that is to come for those who remain faithful to God. So we finish the chapter and the book with rejoicing that is to come in the city in verses 14 to 17 and the restoration of the nation in those final couple of verses. Now, although this is a book of judgment, throughout it all we have this ray of hope. We have the remnant, and we have this that is said of them. In verses 14 to 17 it says, that's chapter 3, 14 to 17. "Sing, O daughter of Zion, shout aloud, O Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away your punishment. He has turned back your enemy. The Lord, the King of Israel, is with you. Never again will you fear any harm." On that day they will say to Jerusalem, do not fear, O Zion, do not let your hands hang limp. The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save. He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. And that last verse there, verse 17, is my key verse for you this evening. The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save. He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. Wow. I love this verse and this hope that it gives us. And I wonder this evening, is the Lord your God? If he is your God, then this is for you. He is with you. He is for you. Whatever is going on around you, God is with you, and he is mighty to save. He can bring you through whatever you are facing, whatever the circumstance. Even if you're stood in the midst of destruction and chaos, your God is mighty to save, and he will bring you through, just as he did his faithful remnant in these days. So now what? Despite Josiah's reforms, the people turned away from God again, and judgment came to Judah and to these other nations through the Babylonians 20 years later, just as God had warned them through Zephaniah. But this book isn't just about that judgment, it's also about the great day of judgment still to come. So the challenge is this: are you part of God's faithful remnant today? The challenge, we need to look back to chapter 1 and remind ourselves what we don't want to become. We don't want to become complacent or hard-hearted towards God. We don't want to turn back from following him wholeheartedly. We don't want to become idolatrous people where it's not just a statue, but we set other things up in place of God in our lives. And that verse that says they no longer seek the Lord, they no longer inquire of him. Let's not be like those. Let's challenge ourselves on these things. And instead, let's be like the remnant that we find in chapter 2. Let's seek the Lord. Let's seek his righteousness. Let's remain humble. Let's do as he commands us. And let's trust in him, that he is mighty to save. We can believe that he is our God. He is with us and he is mighty to save. Just a final thought for you. The name Zephaniah means the Lord has hidden. He hides. He is protected. And that may refer to how God protected Zephaniah through the reign of evil kings to bring him through to the time of King Josiah and to the time that God had called him to minister. But I see another meaning in this. The Lord protects his remnant. He hides them for himself and he brings them right through. The Lord has hidden and protected them for himself through the judgment, like treasure to be refined and made more beautiful. And he does all of that so that he can take great delight in them and rejoice over them with singing. The Lord protects us. He has hidden us under his wings. He has protected us to bring us through whatever we are facing. When we seek him, when we seek righteousness, when we turn away from complacency and idolatry, when we remain humble and obedient, then we are his treasure. We are refined, we are hidden and protected in him. We are bringing him great joy and delight. How amazing is that? So go read it for yourselves. That is the book of Zephaniah.